Let's get started. Well, we are continuing on Deuteronomy. We'll be covering 2 chapters today, chapters 7 and 8. If you're doing the reading, you can actually go online, and on the front page there, you can actually download the reading guide. My encouragement to you is that you read ahead, so that which I skip, you still know the context of what things are doing. We started again, just kind of walking through why is Deuteronomy a significant book to us, and we're doing this thing called looking back by moving forward. Moving forward by looking back, that's the way to say it. And the idea of it being that if we're going to move forward as a church, we need to understand, like, what has God really called us to? And in this move and all these things that can happen, it can be very easy for us to lose focus. And today's message really honestly deals a lot with focus and those kind of things. So we're going to be jumping into that. And I want to give you context again. Here is Moses' last chance to speak to these people before he hands them off to Joshua and they start taking over the land. And so he's reminding them, he's warning them. By the way, I would believe passionately trying to get them to get what's going on. And so let's jump into chapter 7, verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Yep, I did them all. 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. Notice that. He says more numerous and mightier than you. They're coming in as the underdogs. They're coming in as this group. Even though they're 600,000 or so, they're coming in honestly into this situation. He's going, look, they're mightier than you, but watch this. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, meaning he's going to do it, not you, and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction, and you shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. And I dealt in chapter 2 about the complete destruction issue. You can go back and listen to that. But verse 3 says, you shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. One of the things that I think we need to be aware of in this context, and we're going to deal with it from obviously what's being said to the people of Israel, but what's being said to us. The issue is this: God knows us very well. And one of the things he knows about us is that how easily we can be basically cut in on and distracted, and our focus can go other places. When I was in youth ministry, you would have a kid that would be in your youth ministry and on fire for God and doing great things, and next thing you know, they'd hear they got a boyfriend, you'd be like, ugh. Or they'd hear they got a girlfriend, you're like, ugh. The reason why a lot of the times that relationship would take them out of church. That relationship, because then their focus became this relationship, and this is somebody who'd be really on fire, next thing you know, you don't see them around church anymore. And what happened? Well, that person had influence, that person had an effect. And so God is aware of the things that come into our lives, and what happens is that they come in, and sometimes they're not a bad thing, it's just what happens, and sometimes before we know it, we've lost our focus. And so he knows this about the situation. If you go in and you let your kids intermarry here, it's going to undermine what we're doing here. So what I want to say in that context is we got to be so careful. Because I think in our day and age, honestly, so many things can take our eye. It could be a job, it could be a promotion, it could be so many different things. I had a guy one time who said, the worst thing I ever did for my family was buy a boat. Now, I'm not trying to pick on people who have a boat, because remember, the joke is the best day of your life is when you buy your boat, and the other best day of your life is when you sell your boat. That's what I've heard as it goes, all right? But what he said for his family was, I bought this boat and I spent so much money on it that what was a once a month thing, then I started doing it, twice a month and 3 times. And he goes, before I know it, I was telling my family that this boat mattered more than God mattered. And he goes, it was a good thing. I mean, I got it so our family would be together and have activities and do all this stuff. He goes, but before I knew it, this thing had led us where I didn't want to go. And I think that's what can happen. It can happen with a job. It can happen with, I'm going to get this promotion and get this job, and now I'm gone on Sundays and I haven't been to church in months. But I got the money. Interesting questions going on there. So I want to say to you, we got to be very careful about the focus and what we let come into our lives. We just have to be very careful, because before we know it, we're distracted. We're no longer where we should be. And I think he just is very aware. You can't risk it. These people are going to go into, you can't let your kids intermarry in this situation. You can't risk what will happen in this context. Verse 5, but thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash into pieces their pillars and chop down their Asherim and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people of his treasured possession out of all the peoples on the earth, who are on the face of the earth. And so he tells them, listen, you need to go in and don't leave anything lasting. Don't let that Asherim, that pole, that pillar stay there because it could be a part of your downfall. And I think one of the things we have to understand in our walk is why do we let some things that used to be a part of our past stay in our past where it gets a foothold and can be damaging? I'll tell you this story. When I started my youth ministry, one of the first kids I met was a kid by the name of Danny Dunbar. In all honesty, Danny had just gotten out of the hospital when I got hired because he just tried to commit suicide. And the first Bible study we had in our apartment, Danny's coming. And Danny walked in, he had his mohawk and dressed all in dark and everything, and he was not that impressed with me and all that other good stuff. And so I just started working with Danny and really got to love Danny's heart. We would work with him, and he'd go up and he'd go down, he'd go up and he'd go down. And a guy named Rick Cook kind of became the guy that really took Danny on as a project and loved Danny. And I think it was a sophomore year when I came. And in his senior year, I remember it was the beginning of his senior year, we had said to him, Danny, you need to let go of your music. His music was some of the darkest stuff you would ever listen to. And we're trying to say to him, you're trying to have this light in you, but you're surrounding yourself with darkness, And he fought it, and I can tell you the day, I can literally see him. We're standing in our quad area, and here comes Danny. Still had the mohawk, still looked the same, but looked to me totally different. Like I could see something had happened. Hey, Danny, how's you doing? Great. He goes, hey, by the way, I got rid of all my music. And we watched a transformation in Danny's life from that moment on. He just transformed. Danny now, by the way, is a missionary in Europe, and he uses soccer as a way to reach out to people in Europe. But that whole thing was he had this music that just held him down. And it's once he released it, we just saw him spike up. I was on the campus at the high school. And the principal of the high school came up, and I was always on the campus, came up to talk to me. By the way, his name was Jan Button. His name was Jan, a great principal name. I'm sure he had no issues with that. Anyway, so Jan Button comes up to me. He goes, you're Danny Dunbar's youth pastor. I go, yeah. And he goes, can I just tell you, out of all the kids I've had in this high school, he goes, that's the one I thought we were going to lose and that would honestly either be dead or in prison. Or he goes, I had written him off. He goes, I don't know what you guys did, but you guys really just transformed him. And I go, it wasn't us, it was Christ. But it was when he finally let go of that thing that had been a part of his past. My challenge to you is he's telling these people, when you go in, don't leave that stuff around. Is there something you have in your house that you've kept from another time in your life that probably you should get rid of? Is there something you're letting be there that could be this thing that comes back into your life? How can you get rid of that stuff and be cleansed? Christ said to crucify, right? The sinful nature. Put that stuff away. Kill it off. I'm amazed how much we keep that stuff around. And yet he's warning them, don't let that stuff linger. Verse 7. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. It's interesting that Moses reminds him, listen, it wasn't because you were a mighty nation. Look, we like what's big, whatever's the biggest, we think is the best. Whatever is the mass, we think is significant. He goes, listen, it wasn't because you were the biggest. It wasn't because you were considered this most powerful. As a matter of fact, you were the fewest of all peoples. He chose them. And I think it's interesting in our culture to understand that God chose them in their weakness. Because look what he says. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he says, look, to your fathers. Well, what does that mean? Well, it goes back to Abraham. In Romans chapter 4:3, it says, for what does the scriptures say, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. Abraham was not the greatest guy. If you look at his story, he's broken just like everybody else. The difference is that when God said, Abraham, I want you to go to Canaan, he goes, I trust you, God, and he went. Does that make sense? That act of faithfulness meant that he then was the one who believed God, that God would take care of him, and therefore he did it. That act of faithfulness is the key. Not his greatness, not his majesty, his willingness to trust God. That's the heart issue. And because of that, he became the father of this nation that ultimately becomes Israel. He becomes the one, and this nation God loves because it started out with an act of faithfulness that led to righteousness. But we play the game differently. And so what's interesting is that we think that God sometimes wants to choose us because of our skills and, I'm powerful, or God would really love me to have me on his team because he would really need me. You guys remember being picked for dodgeball? You guys remember that process? You always took the best 2 dodgeball players and you let them be captains because you don't want those 2 guys on the same team. That would just be horrible, right? So they become the captains. And you sat there and you're like, please pick me, right? It's funny, the dodgeball guy is picking you on the criteria of whether or not he can win the game. It's interesting, we get older, we don't choose those guys for other things later on. Does that ever make sense? But it's interesting how God comes in and goes, I don't choose you, I choose everyone. And then I use your skills for my glory. I use your skills for my glory. And so God has a different process. God has a different practice with us. He doesn't choose us because of our mightiness. He chooses us because of his mightiness and what he can do when those of us who have faith in him put our faith in him. Jump down to verse 12. And because you listen to these rules, these commandments, and keep and do them. That's very important that you keep and do them. Not just keep them and not just do them, keep and do them. The Lord your God will keep with you the covenant and the steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. The rule is this: if you will do your part, I will uphold my covenant. And by the way, he makes it very clear to Israel, the moment that you break your covenant, then I have a right to end my covenant with you. And ultimately, that's what happens when they get taken off to Babylon. But he says, listen, if you will keep it, if you will keep your focus, and this is where I want us to go for the majority of our time. From this moment, it's like, how do we keep our focus? Because we've already said, be careful of the person that can come in on you and take your focus and take your direction. But he's saying, look, you got to keep your focus, and if you do your part, I will be faithful. Jump down to verse 16. And you shall consume all the peoples that the Lord your God will give over to you. Your eye shall not pity them, neither shall you serve their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Now, I need to explain to you like I did in chapter 2. The people that God has them go and take over are not just average, regular people. It is known that each of these tribes were doing pagan worship that was a debauchery to God. It was a vileness to God. And God goes, listen, you cannot risk. These people are too dangerous. They will undermine everything that you do. It's like literally building a house on a sinkhole. It's going to fall in one day. And he's trying to say to them, listen, you got to be so careful. And I need you to go in and wipe them out because they can come in and slowly start wearing into you. Let me put it this way. Have you ever had someone in your life, a good friend of yours, who started dating someone and your brain goes, this is going to end badly? Like you just are like, and they can't see it. They're blinded by love or infatuation, whatever. And everyone is like, this is a train wreck, right? And then when the train wreck happens, they're all shocked because no one told me. You're like, no, we all told you. And the reason why is that we can see what's going to happen. We can see the brokenness. We can see what's going to come, that they're not on the same page. We can see it. God looks at these people and goes, this is a train wreck. This is a train wreck. You get involved with them, this is the snare. This will grab you. This will take you down. You cannot afford to leave them there. Verse 17, if you in your heart, these nations are, if you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? Here's the answer. You shall not be afraid of them, but shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. So here's this point. You're going to come in, you're a smaller nation, they're a mighty nation. You're going to come in and go, how in the world can we do this? And he goes, this is how. You remember that I pulled you out of the greatest nation of its time. Egypt was the most powerful, the most developed, had the greatest army, and God went in and took his people and pulled them out and has given them and has been with them and has blessed them. Let me say this to you. There are problems that you have and your brain goes, this problem's too big for God, or God can't handle it. And what you need to do at that moment is remember, I have a God who pulled his people out of Egypt. I have a God who pulled his people out of Egypt. And I'm telling you, it is powerful when you start to realize that we have this amazing God and how quickly we forget and all of a sudden make the problem bigger than what can happen. Look what he says. The great trials that your eyes saw, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, and the outstretched arm by which the Lord our God brought you out, so will the Lord your God do with all the peoples of whom you are afraid. He's saying, listen, don't let the magnitude of it be. You have a God who is greater. So let me kind of give you a personal story. Right now, Jody and I put our house for sale in Colorado, and it's been on the market for more than a month, and not one offer. No one's even offered us $1. Like, I'll pay you $1. No one's offered anything, right? And every realtor tells our realtor, oh, it's priced right, it's a beautiful home. Oh my gosh, you should be getting offers left and right. We're not. Zero. Nothing. And it's easy for me to go, oh my gosh, we have double mortgages, we're paying for water we're not using, blah, blah, blah. You go through this whole thing, and my brain needs to say, no, I have a God who pulled his people out of Israel. I think he can handle a house in Colorado. It doesn't take 100 people looking at the house, and it takes one person to look at the house. That's all it takes. And what's hard is in our humanity, we just want to say, God, how can you do this? And God goes, I have this. And what's interesting is God has been so faithful to Jody and I for the years. He has blessed us, and it always seems at the last minute, but he does it in his time. And how do we sit there and go, God, I just can't wait to see what God's going to do? Where do we change our heart and goes, man, this is God's problem. It's his problem. It is his problem. And Jody looks at me, and Jody's just trying to take herself totally out of it. She goes, hope you, and she choked. She goes, hope you and your God figure this out. You know what I'm saying? Because I was like, me and God will do it. And she's like, but honestly, I have a peace about it because it's not too big for him. Let me tell you another story. I've said this every week. I'm going to keep making the joke. I kid you not, 3 years ago, I made this prayer. God, would you do something in the selling of this property that only you could get the glory? Okay? Wish I wouldn't have prayed that because it's been really, really hard. I wish I would have prayed, hey, God, would you just make it really easy for us just to slide into a new building with no problems? That's what I should have prayed, all right? That would have been a lot easier. We have looked at buildings. I've been in buildings. We've talked to the city. We've done stuff, and it's been closed door, closed door, closed door, closed door. I'm going, God, you've got to have something awesome because it's not because we haven't tried, okay? So we're in this process. The days are counting down. I'm going, okay, what's going to happen, God? What's going on here? And all of a sudden I get a phone call that says, hey, would you be interested if if Ohlone College in Newark would let you rent their facility for $5 an hour? Would you be interested? And I'm like, yeah, $5 an hour sounds good. That's great. So honestly, we now are going to be at this Ohlone College. We're getting what they call the Fremont Bank conference room, and we're going to get 5 classrooms. And so 5 classrooms times $5 an hour. We've done all the math. It's still cheaper than what it takes us to run this building with water and gas. It's cheaper what we're going to be doing. Yes, we have to be mobile. It's going to be different. But it has tables and chairs and projectors. All that stuff's all ready to go. And then Discovery Church came to us and said, hey, all your midweek programs, all your Bible studies, your men's studies, your praise band practice, that can all happen at Discovery, and you don't have to pay any rent. Will that be okay? I'm like, yeah, that'd be good. So here we are with a God that is already going ahead of us, that is opening up a door for us to be in a place, and honestly is blessing us. And people are like, and I had a friend, I was at the prayer meeting, they said, where are you going? I told them, they said, how much? I said, you've got to be kidding. There's not a school out there that is renting for that price. Okay. God has this. And folks, there's things in the works that I wish I could tell. Oh, I wish I could tell you. I can't. I wish I could tell you. But God is doing awesome things that, by the way, only he will get the glory for. But listen, isn't it amazing how quickly we forget God and go, the trial's bigger than him? And what did he say? You remember, I'm the God that pulled you out of Egypt. Verse 21. You shall not be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is your God, is in you. Oh, sorry. I love this passage. I'm reading too fast. You shall not be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. God is in our midst. He is in Jody and I's midst of the selling of this house. You can definitely pray for the sale of our house, but he's in the midst of this. God is in the midst of this move. God is in the midst of what's going on. And what's so amazing is we just need to rely on him and go, God, we just can't wait to see what you're going to do. The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. Isn't that interesting? Because look at the next line. This was amazing to me. You may not make an end of them at once, lest the wild beasts grow too numerous for you. You're like, okay, well, what's going on? It's this simple. In the land that is considered Israel now, all these nations lived. Their job, by the way, was not only to establish their cities, but they also kept the beast at bay, right? They were holding that down. He goes, if you go across the Jordan and God takes care of all the people, then when you get to this land, you're going to have all these wild animals to deal with. So he goes, guess what? I'm going to let the people deal with the wild animals until you get there. Then you'll take them over, and then you won't have to deal with both issues. Do you see how God's doing it? And I want you to see that in our lives, I think that's the same thing that happens for us in our faith, is that you come to Christ and God goes, I'm going to let you come to this Christianity thing little by little. Why? You start off with milk, you grow, you mature, ultimately you get to solid food. But what's happening isn't it amazing that there are things that are being kept at bay for you until you're ready to deal with them? And that's what God does with us. It's little by little as we grow. Can you imagine having all of what God gives you just like that as you become a Christian? That'd be overwhelming. We grow in stages. We see God move in stages. I'm watching all these pregnancies. I told Jody one time, I said, wouldn't it be great if women got pregnant, it all happened within 1 month? Like, wham! Every woman goes, no, right? I think there's a process in the little by little to get you ready and prepared, and towards the end you're not sleeping because once the baby comes, you're not sleeping anyway, so you're used to it, right? God kind of knows what he's up against in this process. But here's the thing, it happens slowly so that we can take in as we're ready. And that's exactly what he's having happen here. Verse 23. But the Lord your God will give them over to you and throw them into the great confusion until they are destroyed. I love this part. By the way, most of the battles, read them, go into Josh, most of the battles, God lets the people fight each other. Israel doesn't even have to fight. They just fight each other and kill off each other, which is a great deal. All right, here we go. Verse 25. The carved images of their God you shall burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, or take it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared by it. For it is an abomination to the Lord your God. Same thing we just talked about. Don't let that stuff hang around. Get rid of it. And by the way, don't take it's just silver, I'll just keep that. No, don't let that stuff have a foothold. And you shall not bring an abominable thing into your house and become devoted to destruction like it. You shall utterly detest and abhor it, for it is devoted to destruction. I didn't say that. Again, third service gets the free stuff. Not for long. But I loved in Raiders of the Lost Ark when they put the Ark in that box, and then the swastika gets burned out the side of the box, right? Because God's like, no, that's not going to stay on. This symbol is not going to stay on. I love that. I mean, it's a movie, but I think that's what God would do. Does that make sense? So I liked it. All right, here we're moving on. 8:1, here we go. The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do. You're going to keep hearing this. You shall be careful to do. You shall be careful to do. Why? Because if you don't stay focused, people, that's when we get into problems. You shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way the Lord your God, as he led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And when I look back over what God has done in the life of Jody and I, and how he has blessed us and taken us through some of these incredibly difficult times, and yet he is continually faithful, it helps us to remember why we do what we do today. Verse 3, and he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. Listen, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And that's what we based our whole sustenance series off of. We have a God that wants to sustain us from his power and his might, that we rely on him. And he promises to feed us. He promises to clothe us. He promises to give us the blessings of those things. And what's interesting about that is that when we trust God, he wants to sustain us. When he spoke manna, he actually spoke the word of God, and food came out, and they knew as they ate that God was feeding them. And that's what we need to know, is that God feeds us. God sustains us. Verse 4, your clothing did not wear out on you, or your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord God, your God disciplines you. It's amazing to me that God uses this word discipline here. This is not punishment, it's discipline. I don't think that when I turned 18, I stopped needing discipline. I just didn't have the people around me to discipline me. Does that make sense? And I was able to be my own person. I still made stupid decisions, right? But here's when God goes, no, I want to discipline you. And there are things I think that God does in our lives to keep us on track and to keep us focused. Again, even at 45. Anyway, verse 11. Take care lest you forget. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today. Take care lest you forget. Let me ask you this. We'll do it this way. Raise your hand if you took more than a year of a foreign language in your schooling years, more than a year. And how many of you are still speaking that language? Okay, now, we pick on Tim. Tim took 4 years of Spanish, and he can't go to Mexico and do anything. I mean, it's just horrible. That was his major. It's crazy. But here's what's so funny, because if you don't use it, you forget. You forget. And it's quick, right? I mean, it is quick. Here's what's interesting. This is what this phrase is. You have got to keep God at the center. You have got to keep him the focus. You have got to bring it back. Why do we do church every week? Sometimes it's just to keep focus and bringing you back where you should be. Why do we have quiet time? Why would we open up our Bibles? And here's what I want to say to you. God has given you so many tools to keep you focused. He's given you, honestly, his word. He's given you the Holy Spirit. And yes, he even gave you the church. If you don't use those tools, it's not because he didn't offer them to you. You're just not using them. And by the way, before you know it, you forget. You forget. When I was at the ranch, I just determined to memorize the book of 1 Peter. I did. I can start the first few and I'm done. Because I had to keep it up, right? We forget. And that's what he's saying. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments. By the way, how do you keep his commandments? By doing them. The more you do them, you remember them, and you keep going on it. Jump down to verse 14. Then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Verse 15. Who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water, and brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. So for 40 years, he's going, do you trust me? We're thirsty. Here's water. There's all these scorpions. I'll protect you. I mean, he was just saying, I'm here. And yet there's so many times where all of a sudden I'm relying on me and on my strength and on my own abilities. And God goes, when did the last time you trusted in me? When did you allow me to do something? When did you allow me to have that place? Verse 17, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. One of the reasons why he wanted them to remember is because he wanted them to remember, you only have this because God allows you to have it. That's the only reason why you have it. We had a great conversation at Intake on Wednesday morning about poverty. Because it's very easy for us just to say, oh, people who are in poverty want to be in poverty. Well, You're saying that most likely from someone who had maybe two parents who worked and took care of things and set an example for you, and it's easy to say that. But if you're a young man who comes up, and by the way, your mom has already gone to work before you get up, and by the way, you're already in bed when she comes home from her third job, and there is no male role model around, and you're fending for yourself, and by the way, doing whatever makes sense to you as a 12-year-old, and all of a sudden the streets are right there waiting to wait for you. Poverty is not something, by the way, that is just a choice. Sometimes it just becomes how the way people live to get by. And what happens in this concept is that I want you to grasp what you have. I don't care who you are. What you have is because God allowed you to have it. You were born into a family. You were born above a border. You were born into a situation that maybe gave you the opportunities to use your skills and your abilities. But it's only because God allowed it to happen. And one of the things that he wants us to understand is this: you be aware of the fact that God is the reason why you have what you have. And the moment you start saying, look what I did, you've lost. You've lost because you have nothing without him. Look at the next verse. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is to this day. And so he's trying to say to them, as you go into the promised land, you're going, man, look at this field, which by the way, you did not make. By the way, someone else, probably a Jebusite, built this winery, and you're now getting to take it over, or this bakery, you get to take it over. You didn't have anything to do with it, you just get to use it because God blessed you. We got to be very careful that we somehow think it's about us. Verse 19, and if you forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. We say it again. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today, you shall surely perish. But it's enticing. Because again, the other gods that they were going to face, a lot easier entry point. A lot more fun entry point, specifically when it was all like, hey, the way we worship God is we go to the temple and we sleep with prostitutes. Wow, it's a lot easier than having to do the whole things that the Jews had to do. Verse 20, like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Let me say this to you. This whole morning has been this. He's saying to them, you got to keep your focus. Know the commandments and do them. Keep doing them. Don't give in. Don't let your children intermarry. Don't let them go in. Don't let those Asherah poles and those symbols come in and have a foothold. Keep your focus. Do everything you can. And I just want to say to you as a church today, folks, that's what we have to do. You absolutely need to understand that God is not calling you, listen, because he is a jealous God and he wants you to worship him, but he also knows this: if you don't keep him at your focus, very quickly you'll be someplace else. You will. You'll go after the almighty dollar, you'll go after power, you'll go after prestige, you'll go after, and sometimes, you know what's amazing? Do you know what's amazing to me? Listen to this. You know one of the most powerful things that is happening today? Laziness. You know why? Because we have a culture where it's okay. It's okay to lay on a couch and play a video game all day long. Why? Because no one ever is holding up much. And guess what? But then you're surprised when playing a video game laying on a couch doesn't pay your bills. There's so many things that can get in and take us away from where we want to be. And Jesus comes in and says this. Just watch what Jesus does. Jesus didn't come in and give us more rules and didn't give us more stuff. He actually said this: come into a relationship and become like me. Which, by the way, as I explained a couple weeks ago, is even harder, but it's more focused. Notice that he makes himself the central focus. By the way, every church answer, you always answer Jesus, right? When you're in Sunday school, just answer Jesus. It's the easiest way to go, right? Because here's the deal. Isn't that amazing that Jesus made it simple? Just become like me, focus on me, keep your eyes on me. And the best example of that we have is Peter getting out of the boat. Because what does he do? He keeps his eyes on Jesus. He had the faith to get out of the boat. Awesome. And he put his foot on the firm water. Had a pastor say, yep, doesn't matter that Peter went down. He still holds the world record for water walking, right? 2 or 3 steps. He still has the record. Far better than I can do. But then he took his eyes off Jesus. And then he sank. He took his eyes off his focus. My encouragement to you is to understand that God is bigger and stronger, and he's in your midst, and he just wants he wants to have your focus. I'll finish with this. Zach right now has this thing. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Because you know what he's learned about his dad? When his dad's not looking at him, his dad's not listening to him, right? Dad, look at me, look at me, look at me. Yes, Zach. I want a Pop-Tart. Okay. But he knows, he's smart enough to know what? Till he has my focus, he's just speaking into the wind, right? And so here's the God saying, just look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And if we will, we will have his focus. And the focus in our life will be transformative. Always be aware there's someone trying to cut in. Always be aware there's something that wants to take your joy. Always being something that wants to dangle the thing that goes. There's always the squirrel that wants to make you go down the other direction. But keep your focus. Keep your focus. My prayer today is that we understand how God is calling us to keep Jesus at the center of what we're supposed to be doing. And I pray that for you. Let me pray for that for you now. Heavenly Father, may we be a people who keep our focus on you. Who don't take our eyes from the left to the right, but